Hello and welcome to this first virtual conversation with the Leader and Deputy. My name is Michael and I'm here with Leader of the Council, Councillor Sam Corcoran.
Hello.
And Deputy Leader of the Council, Councillor Craig Browne.
Hello.
Cheshire East Council has a corporate plan setting out a long-term vision for the council to be open, green and fair. As part of the commitment to be open, we are holding this question and answer session to be open to residents. We've received 80 questions. Please do feedback on whether this session is useful and how future events could be improved.
We've received a number of questions from people living in different parts of the borough who feel that their town is not getting the investment or support that they see elsewhere. So Jeff from Crewe writes, why is it that as a resident of Crewe, I feel as a town we're being neglected by Cheshire East Council? Our town is being left to die while other towns in the council area are being developed. And similarly, Kelly from Middlewich writes about her town, and Peter has written in about Macclesfield.
One of the joys and strengths of Cheshire East is the diversity between the towns, with the Middlewich Folk and Boat Festival, the Sandbach Transport Festival and the Allstager One World Day. But that positive diversity can have a downside, and we've received a number of questions from residents complaining that other towns get funding while theirs gets left behind. Crewe is now gaining a lot of attention with plans for the arrival of HS2 and the town centre regeneration, including the granting of approval for phase 1 of the Royal Arcade scheme. The Crewe Market Hall reopened following its £3 million refurbishment, with the venue receiving 3 award nominations recently. The progress on Crewe's regeneration has been made possible through successful bids for government funding. These bids are competitive, and the town has only been successful by demonstrating the economic need for this funding in line with the government's strict criteria, which is not always possible for the borough's other centres. In Macclesfield, work completed this year includes a £1.6 million public realm enhancement scheme for Castle Street, which has helped to encourage further investment in neighbouring private property, with £7 million of investment and 50 jobs created by new businesses along Castle Street recently. In Congleton, work is continuing on the redevelopment of the leisure centre. Work on the Middlewich bypass should start later this year, with main works starting in 2023. More work than ever before is now being undertaken to identify potential projects in a wider range of town centres, and Cheshire East Council is working with town councillors and town councils to develop bespoke town centre vitality plans for Allstager, Congleton, Handforth, Knutsford, Middlewich, Nantwich, Poynton, Sandbach and Wilmslow.
So we've also heard from a number of residents across the borough asking about changes to gritting routes. Richard from Macclesfield asks, the decision to remove many roads in Macclesfield from winter gritting routes creates problems for the most vulnerable in town. Why would Cheshire East refuse monies from Macclesfield Town Council to pay for this service when it would just be a financial transaction rather than changes in personnel or equipment? There'd be no additional liability for Cheshire East.
Well, firstly, I need to say that unfortunately, it isn't just a matter of a straightforward financial transaction. We have a fixed number of gritters and each one has a number of optimised routes that it has to follow. And to add routes would actually mean that we needed to re-optimise all of the rounds. And potentially what that would mean is that we had to invest in at least one additional vehicle. And these vehicles come in at about £250,000 each. However, we are working with the town and parish councils to see what might be possible for next winter and longer term in future. But I have to say that due to the additional likely investment in these machines, we are going to need to look to a longer term commitment, probably over several years from town and parish councils. There's also the issue of public liability insurance being needed for obviously for work on our highway, and this is why we can't simply allow the town and parishes to bring third parties in to carry out the work on our behalf.
Okay, and another Richard, also from Macclesfield, asks about a specific road. He asks, can you explain why Goresworth Road in Macclesfield has been taken off the gritting route? Did anyone actually do a physical assessment of the road and the typical road users at different times of day to understand all the hazards and dangers?
Well, I can, but I think the first and most important thing to say is that all roads across the borough are now assessed according to the same criteria. So both the criteria and the individual road scores have been published on our website. But I can say that as a result of the assessment, 345 roads were retained on the programme. 218 roads were removed, although quite a number of those scored 0. A further 107 roads were actually added into the programme that hadn't previously been gritted. And then we carried out a further review last year in response to requests from fellow members and town and parish councils. And as a result of that further review, another 43 roads were added into the programme. Now, Goresworth Road itself was assessed, but it scored 0, and that is the reason why it was removed. We have identified across the borough about 650 miles of roadway that need to be gritted, and of course they are part of our regular programme. But I think it's also worth adding that under severe weather conditions, we will grit other roads as well. It's not just restricted to the ones that we do as a matter of course. And of course, we respond to requests from the emergency services to carry out additional gritting. And again, I want to say that ward councillors have a role to play here as well in helping to gather evidence as part of the review that we're going to undertake. And so if they have evidence that a road has been scored incorrectly, or that there's been a change in local circumstances, we'd like them to let us know, and they should do that by bringing it to the attention of their local area highways officer. But the scoring of the routes will be reviewed again before next winter's programme, but the scoring and the assessment process needs to remain evidence-based.
In a similar vein, we've also received a number of questions about the quality of pothole repair and road maintenance more generally. So Phil in Alsager wrote, why is Cheshire East so bad at road maintenance? There appears to be a patch badly policy, whereas other local authorities have a preventative maintenance policy by top dressing to prevent road surface constantly deteriorating.
I think it's worth just highlighting, first of all, that we are a rural borough, but also that we're responsible for 1,674 miles of roadway. And the replacement cost to that 1,674 miles is approximately £6 billion. Now, the funding that we get from the Department of Transport this year is £15 million, and that equates to just a quarter of 1% of the value of the asset. So this is a bit like having a car that you pay £10,000 for to buy it, and then just spending £25 a year on keeping it on the road. Now that simply just isn't realistic. But we do carry out 3 types of road repair. There's the level 1 pothole filling, which is reactive. There's the level 2 patching works, which are programmed. And then there's level 3, which is complete resurfacing, which is also programmed. And I just want to kind of use a medical analogy to try and explain a little bit more about how this works. So effectively, the level 1 work is a bit like sticking plaster when you go to the hospital perhaps and you say, I've cut my finger, and potentially a nurse will give you there and then a plaster, which protects the wound, but it doesn't actually fix it. And then if your finger continues to ache, you might go to the doctor and make an appointment, and then they might prescribe some drugs, and that's level 2 that actually numbs the pain. And then level 3 is major surgery. And effectively, if you want to go into hospital and have some surgery done, you expect to wait for that to happen. So basically what's happening here is we would like to do a lot more of the level 2 and the level 3 works, but unfortunately there is a waiting list, and until the funding becomes available, certain roads will simply have to wait until they arrive at the top of the list. Now, in the meantime, clearly the roads are continuing to deteriorate, so we have to apply the sticking plaster solution whilst we wait for a number of roads to come to the top of the list. If we are going to invest more in the level 2 and 3 works, then we need actually at least double the amount that we currently receive from the Department of Transport. But I do want to say that Cheshire East highways do in fact deliver value for money, and this is proven by the fact that we're a band 3 authority, and what that means is that within that £15 million that we received this year from the Department for Transport, £2 million came through what's called the incentive fund, and we need to demonstrate value for money in order to receive that £2 million. If we weren't demonstrating value for money, we would receive even less from the Department for Transport.
We've also had a number of questions about the Council's plans to tackle climate change, support biodiversity and manage the environment. So Samantha from Macclesfield asks, in view of recent landscaping of scrub areas and mowing of inaccessible verges, it would seem that the Council's priorities are to create aesthetically pleasing areas. This seems outdated and detrimental to our struggling native wildlife. Would it be possible to have a change of attitudes and prioritise conservation above aesthetics? And Julie from Crewe asks, why don't the council maintain all of their trees? Julie's lived at the same address for 16 years and not once have the trees been cut back. It's making her house really dark. The leaves get slippery when they're wet and when they're fallen. And Julie's also concerned about the roots getting under her property.
Yeah. Cheshire East Council has committed to be carbon neutral by 2025, one of the most ambitious targets in the country. And since May 2019, the new administration has adopted policies to tackle climate change, and over 20,000 trees have been planted on council land. However, trees do need maintenance. But prior to 2019, there was no tree maintenance policy and very little funding to maintain all the trees on highways and other council land. A tree risk management strategy was adopted last year, and the budget for 22-23 includes an additional £500,000 for tree maintenance. That budget will be debated at the February full council meeting. We do wish to encourage biodiversity, and allowing wildflowers to grow on grass verges is one way of doing this. And a good example is the verges on the Old Mill Road bypass in Sandbach. However, not all verges are suitable. The grass may need to be kept short to maintain safe visibility splays. So please contact your ward councillor if there is a grass verge you would like to suggest for a reduced mowing regime.
Peter from Macclesfield has written in to ask, the council continues to have car parking charges in Macclesfield, but not in some other towns in Cheshire East. This unfair policy has been re-endorsed by the council recently. When will you deliver a fair standard across Cheshire East on this issue? Either every town has charges or none do.
Well, I want to say how much I share this resident's frustration with what happened. We brought a proposal to the committee back in September that would have harmonised parking charges across the borough, but of course it didn't gain cross-party support. And I think that was a mistake, and I'm pleased, having said that, that independent members on the committee did support the change. But the decision not to proceed actually brought £1.2 million of financial pressure to the council. Our proposal did make clear the distinction between town centre and out of town car parks, with differential charging between them. And something else that it did was make a distinction between town centres and village centres, and again with differential charging to reflect that wider range of services that tend to be available in town centres. But clearly further work is going to be needed to arrive at an approach that has cross-party support.
And Ed in Wilmslow asked specifically about the parking review in that town. Pre-election, the council conducted a parking review in Wilmslow. Please provide an update, as nothing seems to have moved forward since 2019 on this. Was the review fit for purpose? And please provide an update on each of the proposed actions in the review.
Well, we've been working with the ward councillors for Wilmslow, and we have actually introduced a number of parking restrictions to try and control some of the more inconsiderate parking that was taking place prior to 2019. So that's included restrictions being introduced on Alderley Road, on Knutsford Road and on Beddles Lane. We've also been working on the business case for a multi-storey car park at Broadway Meadow. But unfortunately, during the pandemic, of course, patronage at the existing car park has fallen quite dramatically and still hasn't returned to pre-pandemic levels. So the council would expect the capital investment that it would make on that multi-storey car park, which is estimated at around about £8 million, to be repaid over the 25-year period. But unfortunately, at the current occupancy levels, this payback period couldn't be achieved, and this puts any investment that the council would be looking to make at significant risk. So instead, we are looking at working with a third party to help share some of that risk with the council, and we're also working with Network Rail to develop a range of options for users of the nearby railway station. But of course, I have to say that parking isn't simply about the supply of spaces, it's also about managing demand. And we've continued to support the 1:30 bus service throughout the pandemic. And of course, we've invested in a number of active travel measures as well. For example, the Alderley Road cycleway, and we're currently out at consultation on a similar cycleway on Manchester Road heading towards Hamforth.
A resident in Middlewich has asked, when will sufficient infrastructure, like doctors and dentists, be introduced to keep up with the increasing number of houses? And a resident in Alsager has asked, when are you going to stop granting more and more planning permission to developers in Alsager? When do you plan to provide the required infrastructure needed to accommodate massively increased population in Alsager?
Yes, I mean, a few years ago, there was a flood of speculative housing applications on greenfield sites across Cheshire East, and many applications were approved on appeal because the council's policies were found to be not up to date. Cheshire East Council does now have up-to-date planning policies and a robust 5-year housing land supply. We have submitted for examination a sites allocation and development planning document which removes some greenbelt land from allocation for housings and strengthens environmental protections. We're also developing supplementary planning documents to further strengthen protections around Jodrell Bank, on biodiversity net gain and on environmental protection. So the flood of speculative housing applications has been stopped, but where planning permission has already been granted, it is not possible to rescind permission. The number of new houses being built around some towns is putting pressure on already creaking infrastructure. Unfortunately, the funding from new developments for infrastructure is set at the time planning permission is granted, and in many cases in the past, that funding has been insufficient to do the things that we would like to do to maintain services. So we are in the situation where new infrastructure has to be funded through council tax.
Alison in Overpeaver has asked, why does Cheshire East Planning not take into account objections from parish councils and residents?
Well, as a former chair of the Northern Planning Committee, I do know that this isn't the case and that officers do actually listen to the consultees. And as evidence of that, the consultee responses are included in officer reports for all items that go before a committee. Ultimately, though, the officers do need to make decisions that are based on policy rather than sentiment. And this means that they have to take into account not just the policies within the Cheshire East local plan, but also in the National Planning Policy Framework as well. Communities can help themselves, though, by developing neighbourhood plans, and this gives them actually a much stronger voice in the planning process if they've got local policies that can be applied and considered. And we have seen examples of applications that have been refused, both by planning officers and planning inspectors who are independent of the council, because the applications conflict with neighbourhood plan policies. Officers also have to consider the reasons for refusal and whether they're likely to stand up if the application is taken to appeal by the applicant. And of course, decisions can go against the council and result in an award of costs, which ultimately, of course, cost taxpayers money because they have to be paid for. There is, though, I want to say, an inherent injustice in the planning system in that only applicants, not objectors, have a right of appeal against decisions. But this is national government policy, so please do take it up with your MP and ask them to lobby the government to change this.
From a resident in Middlewich, when will work actually start on the Middlewich bypass?
Well, the short answer to this one is this month. We have a programme of preliminary works that are due to start within days. These will include a railroad access point, which will go across the Northwich to Sandbach railway line. And the purpose of these works is that they're designed to minimise the subsequent disruption that would otherwise be expected when the main construction works begin. Things have been held up a little, it's fair to say, by the compulsory purchase order process, which is something that obviously is outside our control as a council. But subject to planning and obviously acceptance of our final business case, the main works are due to begin during 2023. So the estimated construction period, once the works begin, is about 28 months. But I do want to say this is good news for Middlewich. This will significantly ease congestion in the town, and I'm sure all residents of Middlewich are looking forward to this project coming forward.
So John from Middlewich has written to ask, how much do all the councillors, including the leadership, cost the council, and who are the top 5 earners?
Well, firstly, it's important to say that councillors are not employees, but rather they receive an allowance, which is then taxed at source. This allowance is currently around about £12,500 a year, and this has remained the same since April 2020. The allowance is based on a recommendation that's made by an independent panel made up of external experts who are completely unconnected with Cheshire East Council. And the panel's chaired by Professor Stephen Leach, who is a nationally respected expert in the field and who has extensive expertise in local government across the country. Now, some councillors, of course, have extra responsibilities, for example, the leader and the deputy leader of the council, and so they receive a special responsibility allowance in addition to the basic allowance. However, this payment reflects the additional responsibility that they have rather than the amount of work that they do. And personally, I have to say I find this really annoying because being deputy leader, and I'm sure being leader also, is a full-time job. The leader of the opposition, as well, of course, as all the chairs of the committees, also receive a special responsibility payment in addition to their basic allowances too. But in total, there are 82 councillors across Cheshire East, and the amount paid in allowances across the year to all councillors is approximately £1.2 million. It's worth remembering, I think, that for some councillors, this is their only job.
As we mentioned earlier, we had around 80 questions and we couldn't address them all today. But Sam, I know that you wanted to explain the important role of councillors in supporting and representing residents.
Yeah, so a number of the questions we had in were very specific ward issues. Now, in my view, a councillor has 3 roles. Firstly, to set the policy for the borough, so that's at a high level. Within a balanced budget, for example, how much should we spend on road maintenance, how much on children's services or adult social care? And those are genuine and difficult decisions. Secondly, each ward councillor should represent the people in their ward. And thirdly, councillors should seek to deliver on what they said they would do when they stood for election. I represent Sandbach Heath and East, so I do take up matters relating to Sandbach Heath and East on behalf of local residents. However, matters relating specifically to Alderley Edge, I would refer to Councillor Craig Browne as the councillor for that area. And I would encourage all residents to work with their local ward councillors to raise and address local issues. The vast majority of councillors want to help their communities, and although they won't be able to solve every issue, they will be able to give advice and point you in the right direction.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your time today. So thank you to Sam, thank you Craig, and particularly thank you to all the residents who wrote in with their questions. And we're sorry that we weren't necessarily able to get to all the questions today, but we are planning to do this again, and we may be able to pick up some of those questions then, and we'll be inviting more questions in the run up to doing another one of these virtual conversations with. And remember, if you want to find out more about local council services or raise concerns, your local council has a critical role to play there, and there's also a lot of information on the Cheshire East Council website also. So thank you both for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.